Hey, I'm gonna preface this video by apologizing about how long this took. This video ended up becoming a what if prediction long length video. I had like 3 essays due for my classes the week this was supposed to come out, so I delayed it a little bit knowing it was gonna be a week late, but I heavily underestimated how long this video would actually take because these second half of players are a lot more complex. There's a lot more going on in their games. There's a lot harder things to rank, so I ended up talking about them a lot longer than I wished to. I just didn't understand the scale of what I was going to be talking about, and that really screwed up my time management of how long I thought certain things were going to take. And also giving a warning, I don't get through everybody in this list. Get through mostly everybody, it's just the top 3 that I don't end up mentioning in this video. I actually recorded myself talking about the top 3, but my audio for the top 3 that I talked about ended up corrupting, so I have to re-record it, and I could delay it for like another week trying to get that part out. I'm thinking more so that releasing the top 3 as a separate video is just finally get this video out. I also think they're just an interesting top 3, and I'd really like to hear people's opinions on how they think that top 3 is positioned. Sorry that's not even fully complete yet, but I promise the next part will be out really soon. I have all the ideas there, I have all the numbers. All I need to do is record and edit it. That shouldn't take that long because I don't have that busy of a week. I am really sorry. If you haven't seen part 1 of this video, you should probably go watch that part first. You don't really have to, but in the intro I discussed the metrics of how I'm rating characters' gameplays, and I'm not going to go over that metric again because it took a while, so you're going to be kind of confused how I'm ranking these characters, and you're also just going to kind of be spoiled on the first half's order of this ranking. Speaking of spoilers, as the title entails, I'm ranking the gameplay of every character in Total Drama who's never made the merge, and based on that metric, there's 2 people from the reboot seasons who both fit into it and will be ranked in this video. If you haven't seen the reboot seasons, I'm going to be giving a considerable spoiler warning before I rank both of those characters, so if you don't want to be spoiled on any of that, you can just go on the timestamps and skip to the next number. With that being said, let's continue.
Hey, what's up? I'm here to slay. Don't know why the rest even bother to stay. I know the game and I brought the skill. Crushing players' dreams, yeah, you know the drill.
I'm going to give a little bit more time to use the timestamps to skip past this if you don't want any spoilers from the reboot season. Alright, let's talk about the reboot characters. As I said before, we have 2 people who made this metric, Scary Girl / Lauren and Michelle, who are both people who didn't make the merge in both seasons. And for number 11, first we're going to be talking about Scary Girl. Much like 2 other people in the first part, Eva and Rodney, she's mostly up this high because of being carried by one metric that she does really well in. You can probably guess what it is, but let's talk about some of her other metrics first, with her sociability. She's a really creepy, mysterious individual. She makes her cast in both seasons that she's in really uncomfortable, and even though I wouldn't say it's as much of the main reason she was eliminated in her first season, it was more so due to the fact that she blew the challenge for her team. Her sociability definitely didn't help. I think some kind people would have given her some grace for blowing the challenge, didn't give her any grace because she was really unnerving. It's hard to give Lauren a strong number on her sociability because she is not like anybody we have ever seen in the show, where she just takes a lot of enjoyment in being so creepy, and we definitely see that change in season 2, where she tries really hard to be normal and she tries really hard to make a good impression on her team, which ends up failing again, where she wasn't even a target going into that elimination ceremony, but she put the target on herself by saying a bunch of creepy stuff. But she did at least try to make some effort in that second season to be more sociable and normal, which is something, but it's not a lot, and I still gave her a 0 on her sociability because she's very similar to, again, someone like Eva, whose sociability is also at 0, because where I think a lot of people have low sociability because they're just not good at talking to a lot of people, not a very palatable option. Scary Girl is someone who actively makes herself a target by being so creepy, and while she tries her hardest to be more normal in the second season, it actually comes off as more of a detriment to her than the first season, because in the first season she was creepy, but she was also on her own. She didn't really try to create any connections, but in season 2 she tries to talk a lot more to people. She tries to insist I'm normal now, you don't have to be scared of me. Puts a more apparent target on her back, because whereas before she was being creepy on her own, now she's being creepy in a group setting where she's bringing attention to herself. Her strategic ability is really weird, especially when you're seeing it over 2 seasons, 2 separate games she played, where they're kind of inverses of each other. In the first season, I don't think she cared about the game at all. She's very similar to like an Ella and a Dakota, where she very apparently didn't care about the game at all, and it ended up being the reason she got eliminated because she didn't care about the challenge, and her team got annoyed with her that she blew the challenge when they should have won it. And if we were talking only about her first season, she'd have a very low score, probably like 1.5, and that 1.5 only comes from the fact that she was technically a part of an alliance with with Priya and Millie. Now, Scary Girl didn't do any work to be a part of that alliance. That was a lot more Millie and Priya doing something, and the alliance didn't really end up working because Millie betrayed that alliance in Scary Girl's elimination episode. But still, being a part of an alliance, even if it was kind of a faulty one, is something, and it's something that I cannot say for a lot of people on this list. After season 1 would have been a 1.5, really wouldn't have been that impressive, but after her second season, noticing her perception of how she was viewed in the game being very unsettling and very creepy and people not liking her, she didn't actually make those steps and efforts to try and be more normal in the game, which I actually think is a very strategically rooted decision in seeing your first season, noticing your shortcomings, and coming back into the second season trying to fix those shortcomings. Obviously, it doesn't end up working because your sociability is still at a 0, it completely ends up bombing, but from a mental, strategic standpoint, it shows she was a lot more conscious about her perception, she was a lot more conscious about her game coming into her second season. It's something I brought her up a point for, giving her 2.5 for strategic ability. It's still below average because we didn't see her do a lot, and she was really out of it in that first season where she was not caring at all. I saw remnants of her being more conscious and aware of her game in season 2. She only made it to the first episode, so we didn't see the full extent of what could have been. So I can't give her a ton of credit for how conscious she really was for the game, because maybe she just wanted to try to be normal because it was like a personal thing and wasn't even relating to her perception or how she was going to play the game. It was just this thing of like, oh, I'm creepy, I'm going to be less creepy. It seems a bit unlikely because I don't get this feeling that Scary Girl really gave a shit about being creepy. I really do think it was a thing of, I'm coming back to this game, I should try to be more normal and like a teenager to fit in with the cast. But again, because she was in it for so short, can't really get a full confirmation on what caused that change. So 2.5 feels really fair to me. Lastly, we're going to be talking about Lauren's strongest merit for being this high up, her challenge ability. In season 1, she is creepily powerful. We see her casually swinging a full-size bear side to side through the air. Also in that very same challenge, she's going to be extremely acrobatic. She doesn't really even seem to be like trying or caring about it, which is really scary because we see her handle the obstacle course better than someone like Priya, who's trained her entire life to be really agile. Meanwhile, we see Scary Girl, very low effort, giggling while she does these really impressive acrobatic moves. It makes you almost kind of worry how good she could have been if her mind was fully in the game, which is where she gets docked some points when it comes to her challenge ability, where, like I said, for her strategic score, her head was not in the game, and that translated a lot into challenges where she never really put in her full effort. And in her elimination episode, again, part of it is sociability, but another part of it is her blowing the challenge because she didn't listen to her team. It shows her unwillingness to be part of her team. She was a team of one, she did whatever the hell she wanted, but that didn't end up knocking her score too much, and that's mostly because in the free challenges before her elimination episode challenge, she was never a hindrance of like wanting to do whatever she wanted. In the first challenge, well, actually in the first challenge, she wasn't really in it. All she did was like pull on a rope to lift this thing up. Even with that, you can say she pulled on a rope. She wasn't difficult. In the second episode, she was really good at dodging all the cabbages. She was really good at shooting the cabbages of the other team. She took a sadistic joy in hurting people, which questionable about her mental state, but we're not really judging that here. So even though in her elimination episode, she was a challenge hindrance, in the other free challenges, she wasn't even remotely a challenge hindrance. I definitely don't knock her for not being involved in the game and being less cooperative than I did people like Ella, because it never really translated in a way that hurt her team except for the elimination episode, and that was only because the quote-unquote flag was skulls, which brought a lot of intrigue to Scary Girl. But if it was anything besides skulls, she wouldn't have even been a hindrance in that challenge. Like, it was specifically because it was skulls that she ended up becoming a hindrance. If it was anything else, if it was any other challenge, she would have done just fine, which left me of giving her a challenge ability score of 7.5. I do consider her above average with that extreme physical strength, and she was compliant in challenges in her own way, but still helpful to the team. I just can't really rationalize giving her higher than a 7.5. Even though she's good at challenges, she still has her flaws as a challenge competitor, especially in the Premerge when it comes to working on a team, when it comes to being focused on the game. And I also think her performance, even though it was only one episode in season 2, wasn't the best, leaving her for a total of 10 points. And you should really remember that number for total because it's gonna be revisited again. And with her being covered, I'm gonna put her back here in this land, so that way when I come back and I go to 10, people who skip for the spoilers won't be spoiled. At number 10, we have one of the only two people left from the first generation, Tyler. Tyler actually made it a lot further than I thought he was going to be. When I think of Tyler's game, I don't think of someone who played a very impressive game. It's really sloppy, and while I do think he has a decently versatile game where I don't consider him to be really bad, I don't really consider him to be above average or even average at any aspect of the game, but still he ends up making it to the top 10 just because I forgot how many people really suck at this game. Speaking of this like light green tier that we're running into now, it represents players players that I don't think played bad games. I wouldn't call them good games, but we're light oranges. You didn't play a terrible game, but you still played a bad game. Light green is you played a game, it wasn't really something I'd consider a good game. It was just okay. Which I guess ends up matching Tyler pretty well, the scores he has, especially being at the lower end of okay games. I feel like I've been dunking on Tyler a lot. Let's start with his lowest thing so we can end on a bit of the higher note so that way the Tyler stands don't crucify me too hard. Obviously, his least competent and least impressive score is his strategic ability. I don't think he was someone who ever really cared about the game when it comes to making savvy moves or even like being a part of alliances. I think Tyler really just liked being in the game for the glory of challenges. I think he really liked being a challenge competitor. He really liked proving himself as competent. Never really cared too much, or at least didn't make a lot of mental effort to be a part of votes, to have targets. He's someone who even really enjoyed eliminating people. When it comes to the strategic aspect, he's just really aloof. I wouldn't call it an unintentional awareness, whereas people, like I mentioned at 11, who I'm not going to say the name of because again spoilers, but like the person I mentioned at 11, they were not in the game because they didn't want to be in the game. They weren't trying to be in the game. Tyler is someone who just couldn't be a part of the game. Like, I don't think he's someone that even if you laid out all the intricacies of the strategic game to him, that he would be able to work with it, because he just isn't good at that sort of thing. In Island, he's a part of free vote outs on a team where I'm pretty sure he voted correctly every time, with the Ezekiel vote out, the Eva vote out, and the Katie vote out. However, those weren't vote outs that required Tyler to be strategically smart. Those were vote outs where free people made targets of themselves that round. In season 3, he is part of what I'd consider his first strategical vote out in Noah. He was definitely being a shepherd by Alejandro in that vote. Though, like I said, with strategic ability, you don't have to lead every vote to have an average score. As long as you're included on votes that require some strategic thinking, it could be argued that Tyler made the wrong decision in that vote out because he was voted out immediately next. But it's a really weird circumstance where I do think his best move was voting out Noah and solidifying some sort of connection with Alejandro, and it's really more so of an issue where Alejandro made a bad choice in eliminating Tyler when he did, because he had no reason to. Tyler was completely loyal to him, and really the only reason Alejandro followed through on the vote of getting rid of Tyler instead of Duncan is because he made like a promise with Duncan that if Duncan helps with the airline, he won't vote Duncan, and Alejandro followed through on that promise because, I don't know, I guess for some reason sometimes he likes to have honor. I don't know, it was really dumb, and again, I think Tyler's best move in Noah's round, as much as people might not like it, was getting rid of Noah and solidifying a connection where he was loyal to Alejandro. And again, like I mentioned, Tyler's strategic ability, he's not someone who can ever really think of smart moves, so he ideally should work with someone like Alejandro who will help lead him through these big moves. And this should just have an awareness to know when he should kick off Alejandro, which is not something I could ever really see for Tyler. But again, his best strategic move in that round to me was getting rid of Noah. So even though I view him as someone who was really ever in the game mentally, he did still care about the game from the physical aspect of being in the game and having the glory of winning, and he was part of strategic vote of Noah. And none of those things are like really that impressive when you're looking at the average 5 scale. Like, he's not close to that scale. But based on everyone else we've talked about and all the people even here that we still have to talk about, not a lot of people can say they care about the game as much as Tyler, or they've been a part of a strategic vote. He gave him a strategic score of 1.5. His feats aren't massive, but they are something. Next is sociability. A lot of people would assume Tyler has average sociability because he's not someone who is too bad at sociability. He's not someone who makes an enemy out of himself. And he does talk to people a good amount. He's very open. He's very honest. The issue with him in sociability mostly stems from his first season, where he's very I guess it's more so a fault of his writing. Pretty shy. He doesn't talk to a lot of people, and the only person he does talk to extensively and does build a good connection to is Lindsay. And Lindsay is on the other team. So it's not a good social move really to be working with people on the other team when you haven't worked with people on your team, even though he never actually got caught doing that, and that was never the reason he got eliminated, which is kind of weird because it would have added a lot to Tyler's elimination episode where he got eliminated for being bad at the challenge even though he completed his part of the challenge. That's getting into an entirely different discussion. In Island, I think his sociability just really suffers with the fact that he doesn't put himself out there. He doesn't take that extra step to go talk to other people, and when he does, it's usually like in a challenge setting where he's bragging about himself and it's like, I can help us win this, I'm really good at this. Like in the dodgeball challenge, he told his team, trust me, I'm really helpful, and he blew it. Then just has like a bunch of socially awkward and a little bit socially unaware lines in both Island World Tour, so I would consider him below average when it comes to sociability. However, I don't consider it a ton because he never made a target out of himself. In both his games, no one ever voted him out because he was too socially weird. Both times it was just because he was viewed as a challenge hindrance. Even though the only person I can actually think of him having a really good connection with was Lindsay, I definitely think there's worlds where he could have bonded with his team. Kind of got screwed over with this team he was in World Tour, where there's really strong pre-established connections, none of which he was really fully involved in, but I still gave him a 4.5 to his sociability. Favorite thing to talk about Tyler, challenge ability. He is so weird when it comes to his challenge ability, where a lot of characters show a pretty consistent trend of being mostly bad at challenges or mostly good at challenges, challenges, or like they'll go down on challenges, and then sometimes maybe they'll have a little up, but for the most part they're still going down, or same thing of going up. Sometimes they have a little down but still go up. Tyler is really odd. He goes up really high and then he goes down, because there are some challenges I can point at in World Tour. Tyler was either really big help in winning the challenge, or he single-handedly won the challenge for his team. Outside of that though, it's someone who's constantly getting hurt, slowing down his team. Whenever it involves anything of smarts, he's completely clueless and unhelpful. When we're looking at just his island game, he wasn't impressive at any part of the game, and even though I wouldn't say he was a hindrance in every challenge, in his elimination episode he technically faces fear twice. The World Tour game is a lot more impressive. Again, he's a fumbling idiot who gets hurt all the time and he sucks at anything intelligent. There was still a time where he single-handedly won the challenge for his really strong fingers. Then again, you look at his elimination episode, he got the alien artifact destroyed, which is why the team lost. He's someone with really high highs and really low lows, but I do think for the most part I consider him less useful than he is, and I think a lot of his ability and a lot of success on Team Chris stemmed from Alejandro and his ability to manage Tyler than it was so Tyler as an individual. So gave him below average challenge ability with a score of 4, leaving him for a total of 10 points. Now those of a keen memory will remember that number 11 also had 10 points. Without giving any spoilers about who 11 was, I'm going to vaguely explain why I put Tyler above them, and it mostly just has to do with placement. Tyler made it decently far in both his seasons, especially when we're looking at World Tour, and number 11 did not make it very far in either of their seasons. Even looking at Island, where Tyler got eliminated pretty early, he got eliminated 4th on his team, which isn't really that bad, whereas number 11 got eliminated earlier than that. It's really hard to not use spoiler language. They got eliminated earlier than that, Tyler didn't. So even in Island, where I consider him to place pretty badly, he still did better than them.
The moment that I'm doing fine, you guys are on my mind.
Very similar to Tyler, she was very close to making it to the merge in her season. I have Anne Maria from Revenge of the Island. She is one of the few people in this ranking that is a pre-merge boot because she quit, and that's gonna make her rankings a bit more difficult to examine, because a lot of the boots before her had one of these few factors they did really bad in, which is why they got eliminated. Anne Maria doesn't, because her reason she got eliminated was because ooh, shiny diamond. Now I definitely most strongly credit that weakness to her strategic game, because her head was in the game, but even then it's still a weird circumstance to Anne Maria where she got a diamond that in her mind made her very rich. Technically the optimal move for her mindset of quitting was to leave the show, because she already got what she needed from the show, which was money. Since we're talking about her strategic ability so much, we might as well start her for that one. Her strategic ability in her season, she never really seemed to care that much about the game. She even states in the confessional that the only reason she joined the show was because she saw it in World Tour and she really liked the singing, and she wanted to sing on the show because she thought she had really good vocal talent, which is really very similar to Ella. Like I said though, when it comes to diamond and money, she definitely cared about the money of the game. I gave her a strategic score of 1. Her elimination, as weird as it was, she technically made an optimal move and also showed that she cared about money, which is a very tiny, teeny bit of something that allowed me to give her 1 point. Next, let's talk about Anne Maria's sociability. She's not very good at it, especially just with like her team. They're all very like kind people. You have Cameron, you have Brick, you have Mike, you have Zoe. Anne Maria's just so unapologetically herself, but herself is just a very brash, rude individual. She constantly gets in fights with Zoe. She connects really well with Vito, which is cool, but that doesn't really translate to her working with Mike. And her season makes it really weird for her ranking. Very few votes before the merge. It's mostly just because her team doesn't go to elimination until the last episode before the merge, where I definitely see points in the pre-merge had her team lost, she would have been eliminated, or even if her team had lost 2 or 3 times, she definitely wouldn't have been on that team anymore. Like, she very much gets saved by the fact that Scott is throwing the toxic rats, and that has to do with the fact that she doesn't take a lot of extensive efforts to be kind of people. She makes enemies out of Zoe and Joe, and even though she doesn't technically try to with Mike, she makes enemies out of Mike. I do think her and Cameron are, as well as Brick, are pretty generally neutral, where she doesn't make a ton of efforts to be super chummy with them, but she does have scenes of defending Brick from Joe in the night challenge, or being like kind of Cameron and apologizing for accidentally spraying some hairspray in his mouth. Little moments like that where you can see Anne Maria is a human. I don't even think Anne Maria is bad at being social. The issue is that she's such a strong personality and she doesn't know how to let that go, and she should. Certain times she comes into another strong personality or conflict arises, she becomes very combative. She kind of outcasts herself by being so easily mean and being such a strong personality. But if she was on a different season, she's not even someone who intentionally outcasts people. Like, she doesn't outcast people who she deems to not be worth her time. So I put her sociability at 3.5. Comes out very rude at times, but she also comes off as very welcoming and accepting of different kind of people. She's very accepting of B, Brick as a human, Cameron for a bit of his more awkwardness. She's having pretty good moments of her sociability, but she just also has a lot of bad moments. And that on top of her never being that well positioned on her team. Last, we're going to talk about her challenge ability. Kind of an interesting one. She has moments where she's shown to be completely useless, but then she also has moments where she's shown to be very useful. What comes to mind is the third episode of Revenge of the Island. She scales that entire mountain in the first part really quickly, even faster than Brick or Joe, because she starts way later than them, but gets to the top just barely after them, which is really impressive because Brick and Joe are two individuals who are considered very physically inclined. Later in the second part of her challenge, her really strong Stonewall hair is a very good asset at blocking the snowball shots. Where it gets more difficult for her challenge ability, she's shown at times to be someone who doesn't care about the challenge and not really contributing as much as she should. Even in that first part, beginning of the challenge, she just didn't care and wasn't going to help at all because she didn't want to, quote, damage her nails. Didn't ever really end up becoming a hindrance. She still went to the place of her team. She still did what she needed to. For every moment that Anria has where she's a bit difficult, I do think there's also these moments where she shows a willingness to contribute in the challenge. In the first episode, she's one of the people who volunteered to try and use a trampoline for her team to help her team take down the statue. It didn't really end up working. She's kind of ended up hurting herself a bunch, but still that inclination to offer herself up to help in the challenge is something I would reward her for. Initially, I had Anne Maria at like 6.5, 7 out of 10 for her challenge ability, but I ended up dropping her a good amount, mostly because when I put her that high, I was also including her fashion ability, but then I actually rewatched the fashion challenge, and I remembered she didn't come up with the design for her team's maggot. Her initial design was regarded by the entire team as like kind of trashy, kind of like weird playboy-y. I still put her above average because I think her physical strength and her hair Stonewall in the first challenge was really impressive. Those are really the only strengths when it comes to challenge ability, leaving her with a challenge ability score 5.5 and also a total of 10. Now the reason I put her above number 11 and Tyler, she technically didn't get voted out. Tyler and 11 are both people who got voted out in the pre-merge in 2 different seasons, and Maria didn't even get voted out in the pre-merge one time. She only got eliminated because she was stupid and quit under iffy circumstances where it wasn't even that her head wasn't in the game when she quit, she was just easily tricked. I do think she would have been eliminated pre-merge in the next episode anyways, looking at the way those votes fall, during the fact that Scott would always been immune with the immunity statue, and Zoe, Mike, and Cameron would have never voted for each other because they were way tighter than they were with Anne Maria. Anne Maria most likely would have gone in that next round anyway, but because she technically didn't, and there's still some plausible deniability that she could have saved herself if some varying circumstances, similar to Dakota, where Dakota's Zora doesn't come back, a lot of weird things happen in that challenge, and maybe she couldn't end up making the merge, was enough for me to put her above number 11 and Tyler.
You asked me what I wanted to be, and now I think the answer is plain to see.
At number 8, we have Sam. Sam made it significantly higher than I believed he would, especially looking at the 2 games he played. He didn't do particularly well in either of them. He was the 2nd boot on his team in All-Stars, and he was the 4th boot on his team in Revenge of the Island, which isn't very impressive. And like I said in the first part, people who have been voted out twice in the pre-merge are generally people who I don't really think played that good at games, because if you got eliminated early 2 times, clearly just like something wrong with the way you approach the game at that point. But when re-evaluating Sam's game, I actually don't think he did that bad, especially in one area that I'm probably going to have to do a lot of explaining for: challenge ability. Sam is like a 2nd generation Tyler. He has really high highs in challenges, and he has really often low lows in challenges. And it makes him really annoying to rank because, like I said for Tyler, most players usually go consistently good in challenges for the most part, or consistently bad in challenges for the most part. But having a player who's at challenges where they do really bad, then really good, and really bad, and really good, it's really jarring to get a good idea of how useful they are. I think one kind of minor pro, but one big pro for Sam in his case when it comes to challenges, is that he was trying his hardest to help in challenges, which again is weirdly enough also very similar to Tyler. Whenever Sam was given a task in his challenges, he worked his absolute hardest to accomplish it, and I do applaud him for that, especially where in his first season he was actually a pretty good challenge competitor on his team. Like, he helped his team win certain parts of challenges by being so dedicated to working in challenges. In the first challenge of the 2nd episode, he openly admitted to his shame to get his team a point. In the first challenge in the 3rd episode, he distracted the mutant cockroach guarding all the supplies so that B was able to make them a jetpack rocket to win them the first part of the challenge. It didn't really end up amounting to a whole lot because his team lost a ton, but obviously that was mainly due to Scott being Scott. Instead of anything wrong with Sam's contributions to challenges, I wouldn't even call him a massive hindrance in any of those early challenges. I do think he's a little bit of a hindrance. If you look at the second challenge in the third episode, he fell into the frozen lake, turned into a massive ice cube, and didn't do anything with the challenge. It's also kind of the reason that Scott was able to throw the challenge so quickly, because using the light glass mirror that B made, he reflected it off Sam to quickly do it, and if Sam didn't freeze himself, then Scott couldn't do it. But I don't really blame Sam for that, because again, that's a really weird circumstance where it wouldn't have been an issue if Scott wasn't Scott. Still, he was frozen the entire challenge, didn't do anything, didn't make any progress towards grabbing the other team's flag. I mean, to be fair, he also didn't want to be in that position, was kind of forced into it, and he knew he wasn't going to be good at it. In spite of all of those times where he was kind of a hindrance, he was also the reason his team won the fourth night challenge in Revenge of the Island, where he single-handedly carried him and Scott through the finish line. And if it wasn't for him, his team would have lost. And in his elimination episode, his team was completely miserable at getting to the top to fight the Yeti. Even though Sam failed at following through and completing the challenge, he did do very impressively at making it to the top. Just Sam's Revenge of the Island game put him at a 5, or maybe even like a 5.5. More of an asset than I would a hindrance, or at least an equal part an asset to a hindrance. Drops a lot when we're looking at his All-Stars game too. He was not helpful in a single one of those All-Star challenges, except for the pancake eating challenge, where he single-handedly almost won the challenge for his team. But first we need to talk about his abysmal performance in the first 3 challenges. First challenge, he got mauled by sharks. Second challenge, he was the only person on his team who didn't find his piece in his section. If he didn't coincidentally by a booby trap get knocked into the place of sand that he was, his team probably would have lost because they wouldn't have found the last piece that Sam was supposed to find. In the third challenge, he was really battered up from just coming from Boney Island, and basically just acted as a big, walking, useless, beaten up man that the team had to work around because he was too weak to help in the challenge. But as promised, we'll talk about his episode 4 performance in All-Stars, which was a really impressive one. His team would have been completely dead in the water in that challenge if it wasn't for Sam. Unfortunately though, like his last season, where in his elimination episode he had a very impressive showing, didn't win the challenge for his team in episode 4, and he could have had he just eaten that last bit of pancake. With all that being said, I hope you see why Sam was such a complicated one for me to rank, because I'd argue he has even higher highs and lower lows than Tyler, especially for someone who was, even though he competed in 2 seasons, he was in it for a really short amount of time. Like, I don't know how many challenges he competed in off the top of my head, probably say somewhere around like 11. 3 of them were ones where he almost single-handedly won it for his team, which is absolutely crazy when you look at it like that, and it is why I decided to give him a bit of a more favorable score of 4.5. I think on average he's more of a hindrance than he is an asset. For the times he was an asset, were impressive showings. Much like his challenge ability, you wouldn't expect, based on his stereotype, his social ability to be where it's at. I actually think Sam is really good when looking at his social game in both seasons. Neither season was really a situation where he got eliminated because people didn't like him. You could argue so in Revenge of the Island, he was on the outsides of a very bro, man-like group, but even then, he didn't get voted out because people didn't like him. He got voted out because he was viewed as a challenge liability. Looking at his early game in Revenge of the Island, he talked with a lot of people, and I wouldn't say made strong connections with anybody, but he did make pretty good connections with people like B, with people like Dawn, with people like Dakota. And that's kind of where we get to the issue of Sam's game, is that all the people he was closely aligned with were people who were voted out, and in B's and Dawn's case were people that he had a hand in voting them out, which was completely the wrong move for Sam, because had he kept B and had he kept Dawn, he wouldn't have found himself in the situation he was in his elimination episode. But we're going to talk about that a bit later for strategic games. I obviously think that's much more of a fault there, where again, he found time to talk to these people and was really supportive and kind. And despite his stereotype of being like the weird indoor gamer dude, he came off very personal. He was a bit like socially awkward, or socially, I don't know what the word would be, not like super normal because he was game obsessed, but he never was those in a way where people didn't like him. And again, looking at his team, the only people who he didn't really build a connection with were Stacy, because she was eliminated in the first episode and she was just difficult for anyone to get along with, Lightning, and Scott. Lightning didn't like him solely just because Sam was really easygoing and was okay with losing, and Lightning really didn't like that. But I wouldn't put that on either of their social abilities as an issue. It's just simply a difference in personality when it comes to the two of them as people. His All-Stars game is really confusing to rank for social ability. I hardly even know how to factor it into his social ability. In the second episode, he was extremely sick from losing a lot of blood, so he didn't talk to a lot of people because he was sick. I don't fault Sam for it. I'm not going to hinder his social ability because he wasn't a happy-go-lucky fellow with his team and having a lot of conversations when he was aggressively ill. And same for the third challenge, where he wasn't very sociable because he was mauled by wildlife. And in episode 4, he was still feeling those effects. I don't even really account his All-Stars game when it comes to sociability, because most of it, he just wasn't the right state of mind or right state of body to be given a fair ranking. I do think it's a bad look for a social game in All-Stars when he got eliminated for keeping the final bit of pancake. It's a bad social move because it made his team not hate him, but think a little less of him, where he should have been able to better integrate with his team, or at least had a lot more sympathy from his team for what he did. I also believe that Sam is someone who you put on a lot of other seasons or a lot of other teams, and I don't see him integrating too well. I don't see him failing at integration. I could see him outcasting himself. It didn't end up happening in either of the seasons, mind the exception of the All Guys bro team in his elimination episode. I just still think there's faults when it comes to Sam's social game, and while I find him as someone who's very personal and talks to a lot of people, I don't think he ever really was able to find that one person that would have helped him a lot. The only person he ended up doing that with was Dakota. That was mostly due to the fact that she came back and wasn't in the game. So because of all that, I gave him a sociability of 6. I think looking back, I could have seen myself going a bit higher with this. There's an argument for him being 7, but it really was his All-Stars game bringing him down, like it was for his challenge ability being brought down in All-Stars. All-Stars really did show how much Sam was on the outs of that team, and again, it's just like so hard to factor that all into his game, which is why I didn't end up knocking him a ton. And last and definitely least, we'll talk about his strategic game. In his first episode, he has a confessional saying basically, I don't have a lot of hope of being able to win this thing, but hey, wouldn't it be cool if I got booted like 5th or 7th? That was how much Sam's head was in the game. And in that first episode, whenever they weren't competing in a challenge, Sam was just playing on his Game Boy. That was all he was doing when a challenge wasn't involved. In the second episode where his Game Boy gets taken, I do think he takes the game a little bit more seriously, where he's more active in talking to people, but was ever strategically mentally in the game. He didn't seem like someone who ever cared or fought about the game in any strategic regards. Even for all the people he was being friendly with in his sociability, he wasn't doing that to like have numbers or make it far into the game. He's just a good dude who wanted to get along with people, which is cool for his character, cool for his like pureness of heart. But this is a total drama, and we didn't see him give a second thought to the strategic asset. I drop him a lot in his first season, where I've said with a lot of these people, oh, they weren't a part of a strategic vote because the votes they did do were really elementary. It was somebody outcasting themselves or somebody messing up in a challenge, somebody doing something really wrong to make a target out of themselves. They were the obvious vote out. Sam is the exception, where he is a part of strategic votes. They're just strategic votes that Sam shouldn't have made. He was a part of strategic votes that hurt his game. He shouldn't have voted out B, and he shouldn't have voted out Don. I give him a bit of a grace because it wasn't like he just did this because somebody, sweet talked him and was like, hey, we should vote him out, and Sam mindlessly followed them. B and Don, at the time, with the way Scott had set it up, were reasonable vote outs. He had good reasons with the knowledge he had to vote out B and Don, but I also think there's an argument to be made. How did he fall for everything Scott said so easily? Like, the way Scott expertly fooled his team in the pre-merge is a lot of the reason that I dock points to basically every member on Team Rat. Scott did play it well in framing B and Don. Don't think he had nearly as much evidence as he should have for his team to just quickly follow along like little ducklings. Probably down to like a 1.5. It wasn't Sam just being a full moron. With the knowledge he had, it was a reasonable move. But now looking at his All-Stars game, I dropped it down another 0.5. He didn't care about any strategic aspect of the game, and he only came back to the game to get into contact with toxic waste and become mutated like Dakota. So even his reason for coming back to the game was weak.
Hey, what's up? I'm here to slay. Don't know why the rest even bother to stay. I know the game and I brought the skill. Crushing players' dreams, yeah, you know the drill.
At number 7, gonna give a little bit more time so you can skip spoilers. Alright, at number 7, we have... where is she? Nichelle. She's really great. Let's talk about her challenge ability first, because I think a lot like Tyler and Sam, where they have really high highs and really low lows, Nichelle is very similar. The difference between her and them is that they are pretty consistently bad or good. It was kind of like Sam was pretty bad at some challenges in the first season, really good at some challenges, really good at one challenge in the second season, really bad at the others in the second season. Like, it's a mix of being bad and being good, because it's just kind of the way they are, and they have really select skills that are sometimes helpful. Nichelle's situation is really clear cut. Her first season, she was terrible. Her second season, she was really good. It's like ranking two completely different versions of Nichelle. I'm gonna try and just talk about both her games first to get a good idea of where I'd rank her games individually, and then understand how I try to combine them into a single rating. Her season 1 game is miserable, and I think we all know which episode I'm talking about mainly when I say that, which is her elimination episode. She is so pathetic in that obstacle course, where even people like MK and Millie, two people who I consider to be really bad at challenges, do better than Nichelle. Nichelle can't even begin to climb the rope without falling down, and her performance was bad enough. Her performance would have already put her, at the very least, a 3 out of 10 to me. But then after she basically completes the obstacle course, she has a breakdown after she got her number, but not running to go actually submit the number into the final chamber thing. Really shows she wasn't like involved in the challenge as much as she was supposed to be. And her team wouldn't have even lost from just her straight challenge ability because she did complete the entire obstacle course before the last person on the other team even started. She could have absolutely won the challenge even with how horrendous she was if her head was more in the challenge and she was just able to ignore all of her feelings and run to the end. That in itself gets a bit complicated because I think I put more of that on her social ability of being so emotional and sensitive with her background of not really knowing who she is because she was a movie star and everyone thought she was this great action stunt woman, but she wasn't. And also onto her strategic score where her head wasn't really as much in the game in that moment, but we'll also get into that later because that gets complicated in season 2. In season 2, she does a lot of training and she is really physically inclined in that season. She does impressive jumps, she gets ahead in challenges and helps her team in challenges a lot due to how strong she is. Just off the top of my head, she wins the first episode challenge for her team. She gets points in the 3-point slide among other points in the second episode. She's one of the few people on her team that makes it across the other side of the island in episode 3. And in episode 5 where they did the obstacle course side of the ice labyrinth maze, she did really impressive in those challenges too. She was a really big challenge asset to her team in season 2. This is where my problem stems. You have 2 extremely varying challenge ability games in her seasons. In season 1, I'd rank her at 1.5 if I'm being generous, and in season 2, around like a 7.5. It isn't quite an 8 or a 9 just because all of her challenge helpfulness in season 2 is due to her physical ability. She doesn't have anything else going for herself, and I don't really think she needs anything else. Still a very impressive score, but to boost her up a bit to the 8 and a 9, she needs to show a lot more ingenuity in challenges, be a lot more of a challenge leader, be really smart, and even though her physical ability was really impressive, it rarely ever won her team the challenge. It was really just that first episode where it ended up winning her team the challenge. But I'm trying to combine a 1.5 score and a 7.5 score. It is really hard because there are players like Ezekiel, like Noah, like Tyler, who have like different scores in their individual games from the first season to the second season. And, sometimes they go up by a point or two, maybe 3 points up if they did really good or 3 points down if they did really bad. But I don't think there's anybody else in Total Drama who has had a 6-point difference between 2 games. When I'm doing these rankings, I'm trying my absolute hardest, especially of games where they competed in 2 seasons and make merge, to cumulatively combine the performance of both their games. I do see Nichelle on the higher end of challenge ability score overall, just because she improved throughout her season. She started off bad and ended good, which I consider a lot better than, for example, starting off really good, ending really bad. I ended up giving her a challenge ability score of 6.5. I dropped her about a point. I could see an argument for her being a lot lower because of how miserable she was in season 1, but Nichelle's challenge game is just really difficult for me to rank anyways. I don't want to give myself an aneurysm trying to figure out all the nuances here about her strategic ability. Looking at her first season, I don't think it was bad. I would have put her below average, but pretty high below average, maybe 3.5, maybe a 4. But her second season is where it gets really hurt because Nichelle and Fairy definitely should have made merge in her second season. She was the boot before the merge and she didn't get eliminated in a vote. She got eliminated because she quit. She didn't really care about the game. She just wanted her Hollywood reputation back. A complicated thing where there are a lot of people who I've talked about whose heads aren't in the game for very dumb and bad reasons. Leonard's head isn't in the game because he really thinks he's a wizard. Ella's head isn't in the game because she just doesn't really care about the money. But Nichelle's head not being in the game here, it wasn't like she was being unreasonable in wanting to leave, because with the information she was presented and the information she believed to be true, which I guess we can get into another argument of how dumb she is to really believe that was real. She just got into a fight with Julia and knows there are people on this show who would do various devious things like that. But when it comes to just examining her situation, leaving the show for $1 million where she believes she just got a multi-million-dollar acting deal, it's extremely reasonable because you're considering the 2 options of staying on this death trap of a show to potentially win $1 million or getting your fame back as an actor and certainly winning $1 million. I do think it speaks a lot to Nichelle's intelligent, strategic mind for this game that she so rashly believed this letter that in the same day she got it, she decided to quit. She doesn't consider for even a second or even just sit on the deal for a day that maybe potentially it's fake. And I think that really shows the recklessness of Nichelle's strategic strategic game where she made an enemy out of Julia and didn't even give it a second thought when something pretty fishy happened. On top of that, I don't think I ever really saw her talk about votes. I mean, on top of that, she wasn't even a part of many votes. 2 voting rounds between her 2 seasons, part of the Caleb vote, which I'm not fully sure if she voted for Caleb in that. I'd imagine she was, because I definitely think the hockey bros weren't strategic minds and they probably voted Emma for blowing the challenge. And then Caleb voted Emma because obviously, so they had the 5-vote majority against Caleb, it would have had to been Bowie, Emma, MK, Julia, and Nichelle a part of that vote. Even though she was a part of that really strategic Caleb vote out, I do think overall she wasn't very strategically smart, and I think she was reckless with her actions. I gave her a strategic ability score of 1.5. I know that still seems pretty low despite me saying her reason for leaving was pretty reasonable, but she was doing really bad before that. If it wasn't for what I consider to be a pretty reasonable reason to leave the show, she would have been at like 0.5. She was very obviously not in the game, and quitting is already something that I dock people a lot of strategic points for. And lastly, let's talk about her sociability. I view it as below average because in her second season, I think she was pretty average. She never really went out of her way with people. She never really created any bonds in her 5 episodes in season 2. But she also didn't make any enemies, and people seemed to be generally pretty positive on her, which is impressive considering how much she outcasted herself in her first season, which is what ends up making her below average because as I said for her challengeability in episode 3, she just whines after she completes that obstacle course and really annoys her team for not just moving on in the challenge, winning it for them. And I think there's something to be said about her sociability when factoring in that she did not inform her team that she had a stunt double and she wasn't as physically gifted as she led her team on to be. Because if she had just informed her team, maybe her team would be a bit off-put by her because they view her as a bit of a liar and they wouldn't put her on a pedestal like they did original, and maybe there would still be some sour feelings there because, you know, they're all 16, they probably have a pretty impressionable mind when it comes to movie stars, viewing them as all real actors. It still would have been her optimal move to inform her team. People like MK and Bowie, very rational people, would have understood what she was saying, and even though they might have been like a little annoyed or teased her for it, they would have worked around it and the show would have been able to make it a lot further into the game because people would have probably still liked her to a degree for just how famous and how good of an actor she is. Which is also amazing to mention that coming into the season, she already had a very high perception from her cast due to her famous background, and yet she still ends up blowing it. So I definitely view her as below average, giving Nichelle a total of 12 points. And again, I gotta move her back down here, so yeah. At number 6, who incidentally had the person at the very end of these contenders, we have Amy. Amy's sociability is so convoluted because her personality is terrible, but what we saw in this season wasn't bad at all because she was manipulating her team. Some people saw through her act, namely Jasmine and obviously Sammy. Besides those two, Amy had a really strong control on her team, and her team all thought her to be the victim and thought her to be an extremely helpful person to the team. The reason she was able to have such a strong social game was through taking credit of everything Sammy did. Sammy went with Jasmine on the morning trips to go gather food, and Amy took credit for that. Really, when you're evaluating Amy's social game, it's a combination of her social game and Sammy's social game. Amy was able to play her social position so well, a lot in part due to the opportunities that Sammy provided for her. Had Amy not been eliminated in her elimination episode, and Sammy had gone like she was supposed to if she didn't pull the trick that she did on Amy getting her eliminated, I think we really would have started to see Amy's social game suffer, because she probably wouldn't have gone on the morning gathering trips with Jasmine, and even if she did, she wouldn't have been as helpful as Sammy was, so people would have noticed that less food is coming in, and especially with someone like Scarlett on the team who's very smart and intuitive, she most likely would have ended up connecting the dots that Amy isn't helping anybody and she's actually a spoiled brat. But when evaluating her sociability score solely with what we saw in her game, it was actually pretty good because everybody on her team, minus Jasmine, really liked her. So this is a weird circumstance. I truly believe Amy's sociability score is much lower than what I'm about to give her, but since I'm considering her gameplay and her sociability from her actual season, I ended up giving her an above average sociability score of 5.5. The reason I still land on the lower end of above average for sociability is because of what I said earlier, that truly Amy's sociability score is a combination of her and Sammy. And I don't think Amy would have been liked nearly as much had Sammy not provided those chances that Amy could capitalize on by taking credit for them. Her strategic score is one that I imagine people would assume is a lot higher than what I'm about to give her. I do think Amy has good manipulative tactics and a good strategic mind for the game, solely when it involves Sammy. I don't think she's someone who even really cared about winning the game. Obviously, I think she'd want to win the game to win the $1 million. But for the most part, it seems like she came on the season to do, as she's done her entire life, torment Sammy. And her play of turning her team against Sammy is a terrible strategic move because of what I said earlier when it comes to her social ability. She would be dead in the water when Sammy goes because a lot more spotlight would be put on her. Amy's best strategic decision was to keep Sammy in the game and to continue using her as a puppet but instead Amy having such a big ego and having such a sadistic desire to torment Sammy makes her least optimal move in removing Sammy. Again, I do think she's really cunning, I do think she's really manipulative, and her sociability score is a lot more due to her ability to manipulate her cast strategically than it is her actually being likable. The issue I have is I don't know how devious and manipulatively smart she could be when it isn't pertaining to Sammy. She didn't seem to have much of a mind for her long-term game where she would have realized that keeping Sammy is her best move. This isn't even mentioning that her quote-unquote impressive play in getting her team against Sammy stems from Sammy herself making a terrible social move of going off on Amy and giving Amy that opportunity to paint her in a bad light. I don't think a lot of people, especially endgame, would give Amy those opportunities, and without those opportunities, I don't really know what Amy's game comprises of. I brought her score down a lot when I'm factoring the fact that she made a terrible move in getting rid of Sammy, and I gave her a revised, lower strategic ability score of 3 out of 10. Lastly, let's talk about her challenge ability. There's really not a whole lot to talk about here. I consider her extremely baseline when it comes to her challenge ability. I don't consider her a hindrance in challenges, but I also don't think there were any points where she really proved that she was an asset. And ultimately, I view her as below average because the points she was helpful to her team all stemmed from her just abusing Sammy and taking advantage of all the work that she was doing. In the first part of the first challenge, she was using Sammy as a human shield to be able to get more supplies. In the second challenge where they go through like the grease-filled slide maze carrying a hog, she just forces Sammy through the tunnels, trying out each path as much as she could while using Sammy. And in the third challenge, her elimination episode, I'm not sure she hit anybody with a balloon. She only took credit of Sammy doing so and ended up costing her team the challenge where her, Sammy, and Jasmine all got eliminated by one balloon because Amy couldn't put her ego aside and let Sammy take the shot, so they ended up fighting over a balloon in a challenge which they definitely should have won. So similar to her sociability score, which is really more a collaboration of her and Sammy, when you take away Sammy's part in that, Amy is extremely lazy and cost her team the challenge, maybe knock her challenge ability score to 3.5. As you might remember, the person at 7 has the same total as Amy. Trying to explain why she's above 7 without giving any spoilers to who 7 was. Amy's elimination was just a lot more contrived. Maybe you don't like it, but she wasn't supposed to go home. She pretty much got cheated out and eliminated unfairly. Even though 7 was close to making to the merge, they were also eliminated pre-merge in both their seasons, so they had 2 opportunities to make the merge, failed both times. Amy got eliminated in weird circumstances, so I view Amy above the person at 7. Next at number 5, we have the other twin. No, we actually don't. We have Brick first. Before we get into Brick's game, I'm going to talk about what this brighter, more solid green for 4 and 5 means. It simply just means, I think you played a good game. Light green here at 6 and 10 is an okay game. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad. 4 and 5 is you played a more good game than you did a bad game. It's not like an amazing game where like 50 would be the average. These people at green probably played like a 65. It was a good game, but you know, you got eliminated pre-merge and it was for a reason. Brick has a lot of weird things going on in his game, and while I wouldn't really call any of them unfair, I definitely think they make his journey and his path in his game more complicated of a reason why he ended up going home. His challenge ability score out of the way first, because similar to a Sam, similar to a Tyler, Brick has his moments where he definitely shows to be an asset to the team. You look at first episode, he was the one that brought down his team's like massive totem, which allowed them to continue in the challenge. In the first part of the challenge in episode 2, he admitted to his shame getting his team a point. You have the fashion challenge episode, episode 5, where he created a makeshift exploding duffel bag to dress their team's animal. And you have the first part of episode 3 where he scaled that massive mountain of Joe with only one hand, but even mentioning that, he only had one arm to use because he twisted his other arm, showing the other side of this coin. Where in the second part of the episode 2, during the obstacle course, he cost them a lot of time by running repeatedly into the same post. In his elimination episode, he kind of just bumbled and wandered around for most of the challenge, and saved the other team from the Blind Moon Gophers near the door when he threw his smelly boot, as well as costing us in the challenge, in a challenge where Scott was trying to throw. when comparing him to people like Sam and Tyler, because I don't think he cost his team the challenge nearly as much as Sam and Tyler did, and where Sam and Tyler usually ended up costing their team because they were just completely useless, like they were trying to be helpful but failed at being helpful. Brick cost his team the challenge in his elimination episode because he was willing to lose the challenge, and he made the decision to lose the challenge in the interest of saving people's lives. Even though he has his moments where he's not the most helpful, he's never really too much of a hindrance to his team. Brick is a pretty helpful member to his team. He's really physically strong from his cadet experience, he has a lot of endurance, and he's a true team player, so I gave him a slightly above challenge ability score of 5.5. I do think there's an argument that Brick should have a higher challenge score for wanting to be a team leader, and while I don't think Brick is a terrible team leader, like I think he's better than having no team leader, I don't think he's a good team leader. As much as Brick really wants to be a team leader, I don't think he's a natural born leader. Joe is a better leader than him. Courtney is a better leader than him. Even someone like Duncan, who doesn't want to be a leader, is a better leader than Brick. Again, I think he's better than no leader, and I do think on a team of Mike, Cameron, Zoe, and Anne-Maria, minusing Joe, I do think he would have been a good team leader for that team specifically, but I don't factor his wantingness to be a team leader into his challenge score that much. He never really ended up being a leader to his team because he was constantly fighting Joe for that position. Scott throwing these challenges because it's hard to actually say Brick's part in challenges actually helped his team win challenges when they didn't. If all of Brick's team challenge wins happened under fair circumstances, I probably would have bought him up a point, giving him around 6.5. It's just really complicated to rate the challenge ability score of somebody who technically won challenges and helped in challenges but didn't actually help in challenges. Next, let's talk about Brick's sociability. Brick's sociability is weird. I think he should be higher than what I'm about to give him, but he didn't really ever talk to his team that much because most of his dynamic on his original team was just butting heads with Joe. And he didn't really have a lot of strong dynamics on the Rats team when he was put on it. There isn't really people you can point to for Brick where he had strong connection with them, except for Mike, Zoe, and Cameron when he saved them in his elimination episode, which shows how caring and respectful and kind Brick is. The issue is because he doesn't have a lot of connections when he's in the game. There's not a lot of metrics to actually show how well he can integrate himself socially. I'm also noting that the only people who ever dislike Brick to any capacity are people who, in my opinion, kind of suck. Joe and Scott both don't like Brick, and they're both difficult people. I view Brick's social game as really strong. He's really good at being able to work with even difficult people. He's really good at building a sense of team connection. It's just really hard for me to give him a really high sociability score, so we don't have a lot of metrics to prove how good his social game really is, and the highest score I give him for his sociability is 6 out of 10. And discussing his strategic ability score, definitely the low point of Brick's game. Let's talk about the positives first. A really big one is his ability as a team leader. Now, I don't connect that as much as I do with strategic score as I do challenge score, but his active play in being a leader definitely shows that Brick had a mind for the game itself, and he had a mind for working with people, but that's all unfortunately still pretty weak. I'm going to go to a much larger one. As I've said for other people on this list, generally dock you a lot of points in strategy if you cost your team the challenge, but that mentally being involved or caring about the challenge is evident with Brick in his elimination episode, where he single-handedly cost his team the challenge for his challenge ability score by comparing him to the likes of Sam and Tyler because he cost his team the challenge when he wasn't trying to. I gave him for costing his team the challenge because it was a mental flaw, not a physical flaw. And the other side of that now is that I have to factor his strategic score negatively for not caring about the challenge in that moment. His reason for not caring about the challenge in that moment is a really good reason because he was saving people's lives. Like, I give Ella a lot of shit for not being mentally involved in the game, or Anne-Maria for not caring about the game. It's because they just were lazy or had a personality that wanted to do something that wasn't really involved or caring about what was happening in the game. Brick did care about the game for the entirety of his run, except for that single moment where he valued human lives over the game, which is probably one of, if not the best reason that I will give somebody an out for dropping the strategic score super heavily for not caring about the challenge and losing it for their team, because it was a reasonable thing he did. I don't think he's someone who ever really cared about votes. He's someone who tried to quit in the nighttime challenge for like honor. Cool for his character and brings up his sociability a bit, but also drops his strategy score because it shows he clearly didn't care about the game as much as he cared about being honorable and doing the right thing, which I absolutely think could be a hindrance when you look at his game, that he cares so much about doing the right thing. And even though him going back to save Mike, Cameron, and Zoe was a good thing that I don't knock his score for, there are other opportunities where it comes to like disaffecting the team for a challenge that Brick would reject because he's so honorable, which is kind of a crutch that Brick is forced to use because of his personality. So I still have him with a really low strategic score of 1.5, giving him a total of 13 points.
I'll get there one day, 'cause I wanna be famous.
At number 4, we have the last person from Pacatero Island. Surprising that anyone from Pacatero Island made it this high, but we have Sammy. She definitely surprised me in being this high on the list. When looking at it a bit more, I guess it makes sense. Basically everybody who's up in this, like, even top 7 are people who got eliminated in lightly put unfair or complicated circumstances, so their elimination didn't end up showing a flaw in their game for them to be eliminated so early. And Sammy is a great representative of that, because her game was going really well and was a pretty impressive game up until Amy returned and screwed over her entire position. But there's also the other side of that Sammy probably should have been eliminated third had she not basically cheated. There's no point in sugarcoating it. What she did to Amy was completely justified from a moral standpoint, but in the gameplay aspects, it was unfair, and she definitely should have got eliminated due to some earlier mistakes she made. And while we're talking about those mistakes, talk about Sammy's sociability. Funnily enough, the inverse of Amy is someone who I ranked a lot higher in sociability than I think she should be as a player, but from what we saw in her game, she was very well liked by her team. Sammy is the opposite, where I think as a player and in other seasons, she's a very likable person, kind-hearted person, but what we saw specifically in her season, she was not liked by her team, albeit from Amy's manipulation, but Sammy still makes a very big mistake when confronting Amy, because she does it in a public setting with her entire team, and is very aggressive and emotional in what she's saying, which gives Amy all the ammunition in the world that she would ever need to paint this evil sister image onto Sammy. So that was a really bad look for Sammy's reputation, and it's what got her so isolated from her team, and it's also why my arm's kind of being forced here into saying that she has to have a low sociability, because basically around half her team didn't like her. Scarlet, Max, Topher, I guess if we're including Amy, but undergoes, all the other things I've said of like Eva and them of like bad sociability, where Amy just hates Sammy for the sake of her existing. But still, looking at her team, Topher, Max, Scarlet, Rodney, a large majority of her team hated her, and even though it isn't really her fault fully, it is still her fault for handing over that opportunity to Amy. Factoring in her terrible reputation, I probably would have put her around a 2.5, but I brought her up a point, giving her a total of 3.5 for her sociability, because she had a really, really strong connection with Jasmine, and that's pretty impressive for somebody not only like on this list of people for Premergers where there's not a lot of people who had really strong connection with somebody, but more so because Sammy was not in the game for very long. And by episode 3, her and Jasmine had already created a really strong bond just through Sammy's personality of being very kind and helpful and not judging Jasmine or being afraid of Jasmine. Her strategic ability, I actually gave her a pretty good score of 4.5. I know that's probably not going to be a very popular decision, especially considering Amy's strategic score is at 3, and a lot of people would probably consider Amy to be the more strategically savvy one between her and Sammy. And I agree, but it's also kind of like the sociability scene between them, where Amy did not have enough time to really show how smart she actually was. And again, as I said for her a lot, her move in what she did was stupid. But what Sammy did in tricking her sister, getting her eliminated in her place, and taking over as Amy is really impressive because she thought of it all on her own. The 4.5 is still slightly below average because I think outside of that impressive move, she isn't someone who seemed to care a lot about the game. I'm pretty sure she even says in the first episode that the whole reason she signed up for the show was just to get away from Amy, and she doesn't have any other strategic plans or alliances, and her move was really impressive and definitely put her at a 5 for me for showing that she does have a semi-mind for the game and she can be a part of strategic votes, but I pushed her down to that 4.5 because of that massive blunder she made in her game when she confronted Amy in the way she did. It obviously shows she wasn't aware of how it was going to come off. She was just taking her head out of the game in that moment. But as you see, I only brought her down 0.5 from that. Her reason leaving the game mentally is a very justified reason. She wasn't being like selfish or caught up in her own world, or wasn't even being emotional, considering the trauma she was speaking on was her being abused by her twin sister her entire life. Like, I wouldn't call her reaction an overly emotional reaction. It was just a bad time for her to be doing it, and the fact that she didn't really think through, like, I should confront Amy in private, or I should go a little softer, especially in this public setting, or listen to Jasmine if she's telling me to cool down right now. There's these very, very tiny things, in my opinion, that she messed up on. I find them extremely fair reasons, which is why I didn't bring her down a ton. Lastly is her challenge ability, and it's not a very interesting one to end on because I ended up giving giving her a 5 out of 10 because she is extremely baseline to me. I don't think she's ever a hindrance in challenge, but I don't really ever think of her as an asset in challenges. I wouldn't say she's remotely impressive physically or mentally. She's a workhorse because she provides for the team. She's always willing to help the team. She's also willing to help Team Amy. She's always working with Amy, doing whatever Amy said. And sometimes, especially evident in Amy's elimination episode where Sammy should have stood her ground and thrown the balloon and not let Amy get in her head or get involved in Jasmine's decision, they could have won that challenge, but they didn't because Sammy, for most of her game, was submissive to Amy and was more willing to do things in Amy's vision than for the team. So the very slight positives you could give her for workhorse, I bring down for her loyalty to Amy over the team. All that together gives her a total of 13 points, which is the same amount as Brick. The reason I put Sammy above Brick because of her elimination that I explained is extremely contrived, where Amy, she's insane for being able to get back to this island, because had Amy not done that, I do think there's a very strong case that Sammy could have made the merge. Jasmine was really well positioned on the team, and we were also starting to get to the point where Max was outcasting himself a bit, and Topher was outcasting himself a bit. So had they gone to elimination again, and Amy hadn't come back, Sammy, in my mind, definitely would have been safe when you're considering over Max and Topher. So at the very least, she has 2 more rounds where she's safe. And then at that point, it's a team of Jasmine, Sammy, and Scarlet, in which case Jasmine and Sammy would obviously work together to draw out Scarlet. Also a question if Scarlet would realistically let it get that far. But either way, I think Sammy is definitely safe for the next couple of rounds on her team, and really should have made the merge, where Brick got eliminated for an honorable and good reason. He was being a good person, but he still did get eliminated for his reason. He still caused his elimination, and he wasn't really like robbed from the merge as much as Sammy was. It's complicated because she should have been eliminated episode 3, so technically she isn't owed the merge. I'm gonna stop saying about that because I still have a second reason that I put Sammy above Brick, and it's actually the personal gameplay reason of what I said for Brick earlier, that he is too loyal for his own good. And even though we didn't see a lot of that interfering with his game too much in Revenge of the Island minus his elimination episode, I do think in other seasons it could start to become a bit of an issue because Brick is someone who only wants to win the game playing the right, honorable path, and would let it affect them a lot if he had to play the game a bit dirty or had to go against his honor code. We see that in his season where he tries to quit the game from the guilt of breaking his honor code. Sammy is a better player than Brick because she doesn't have to work with that crutch that Brick does with his loyalty and honor. And even though his super honor obsessed boner didn't really end up negatively affecting his game, I still just think as a player, he's worse off for having those restrictions to his game. I know I said I rank these characters a lot more based on what we saw than how I feel about them as a player, but when people tie scores, it gets more arbitrary, so shush. And there you go. That is the second part of my not completed video. Again, really do truly apologize for this video taking so much longer than it should have. I felt off about getting off track, especially since it was supposed to be a more calm, easier video to make while I was working on this what if, that by the way is also taking really long, so that's just great that I'm behind on everything. But trying to make chicken salad out of chicken crap, I do think this final 3 is a really interesting group. You have Noah, who's really talented at strategic gameplay, you have B, who's really smart and crafty, which helps his challenge game, and you have Don, who doesn't actually have one of those areas like Noah and B, but overall, combining all their factors, there's not really any weak spots, and her elimination is really contrived, but so are B and Noah, so I think it's really close, and even the scores between the 3 of them is really close, so I'd really love to hear your thoughts on how you think the final 3 is positioned on their gameplay. Endlessly sorry, start a hate group, I deserve it, goodbye.